At the time that the vision kind of caught on to try to save this building and to start to focus on downtown, the Paramount Theater had already been renovated, restored. Once people started kind of looking at downtown, there were a lot more historic buildings that had the potential and added a lot of character to downtown. This building sat here for years vacant, and I think it was used as a haunted house once, and people would break into it. So it didn't have a great reputation. The ground floor brick had been painted white and then stucco put on it. It was just a mess. And the city's master plan at that time scheduled this quarter block for demolition, a parking lot, and a convenience store to support the potential for downtown housing. But this was a major location, major entrance to downtown, right across the street from the historic depot that was vacant at that time, and railroad properties that tied into the history. And so the Preservation League, with help from a foundation, acquired 3/4 of this block. Historic preservation for architects is a totally different discipline than new construction. So new construction, the architect can manage and control all elements of it. And when you're using an existing building, especially a historic building, there are challenges, totally unique, and those challenges are often looked at as insurmountable or adding massive amounts of cost, but they don't have to. When this building was built, it had radiators, the air conditioning was open a window, no elevators, none of the code requirement kind of things. The exits weren't here to properly get in and out of the building. Stairs weren't in place. There were just narrow little fire escapes at each end and one stair in the middle. And so when you start revisioning a building, even for its existing use, but bringing it up to code and contemporary requirements for air conditioning and plumbing and everything else, that's the big challenge for the architect. This building was also unique in that, being a hotel, it has what we call double loaded corridors. So you'll see the row of columns down each wing. Well, that worked great. That was real typical for a historic hotel. But obviously that can be a challenge when you're thinking about a museum or any other use for the building other than a hotel. The curators of our exhibits have done a great job with just kind of using those columns as part of the experience as we walk through an exhibit. But we have to remember, just talking in terms of museums, really every museum has its own character, whether it's new or whether it's a renovation or whether it's a museum put in a warehouse or an existing building. Every single museum that we know and love has its own challenges and requires kind of responding. And so they never fit exactly the way you'd like for every particular exhibit. To give the museum opportunity to either have separate gallery spaces or exhibits that use all that space, we needed some way to connect them other than just go get the elevator and go up to the next floor. So we inserted this stair in the very center of those spaces, and we designed the stairs so that it had a historic feel, but it was contemporary at the same time. That's kind of an example of how you approach a historic restoration project. You don't have to do everything as if it was done in 1909, but you can be sensitive to the feel of the building. When you move from just a simple box with a couple of offices and a little storage room, fine arts museum, to a museum complex, then you have to start thinking about locations of things. And then when you have a historic building, this building had windows like this on every face, on north, south, east, west, courtyard face. Well, obviously, a gallery full of windows every 3 feet is not functional for a general exhibit area. And some things, some programs like Children's Museum, the noise we hear and the excitement and the laughing, that doesn't necessarily work real well with the contemplative kind of character of an exhibit space. So one thing we did in this building, and it lent itself to it pretty well, once we got into it and programmed it and started designing, is we took this main facade and we put all the programming elements, starting with the staff offices on the top, Children's Museum, or this space, Children's Museum, lobby, historic ballroom, all of those spaces we could leave and use, and it adds to the character from the street, it adds to the character in the spaces. It's not an issue for those kind of spaces. It also pulled those spaces over on this noisy side of the building, street noise, railroad noise, and it preserved and reserved the quieter areas. So this wing became a buffer for the north wing of gallery spaces. And those gallery spaces on the alley and in the courtyard, nobody really misses. It didn't affect the character of the building to just close those windows in. So that's an example of the creative use of an existing building to make it work for a new program. There are areas, discrete areas of the main gallery that have higher ceilings, and the ceiling in those main areas is just below the historic ceiling. So where do you put the air conditioning, the ductwork, and the main bundle of the main wires that run, big conduits? So we drop those over in this center area, and it has a lower ceiling. But you try to do it in such a way that it doesn't just totally ruin or distract the use of the wall areas. And the primary spaces in those galleries are the walls. One of the most popular things was that rooftop garden, and every entity that was involved wanted that restored. And it's been pretty popular. Some much bigger museums envy our museum because we have that separation of spaces like this, and we have things as wide-ranging as that courtyard, protected courtyard, and that rooftop terrace as adjunct kind of spaces. So we have to remind ourselves that we've got quite a jewel here. The most obvious thing that was missing from the main front facade was that corner wraparound canopy. Historic photographs all show this canopy in place. But we had no material evidence, no drawings, other than just, there's a hole there where it looks like a beam might have fit in. And we have these photographs. So using those photographs, we carefully calculated and replicated and scaled in 3 dimensions how high it was, how wide, the spacing of the columns, just how it was constructed, because that's a major element. That's a major part of the statement. So we worked out our drawings, and when we tore into the sidewalk out there, we found the footings for those original columns, and our drawings matched those footings to within ½ an inch. You never know what you're going to find once you start renovation and revealing things. And so we knew when we found those footings for those historic columns, we had the scale just right.